Well, it's time for the tactics meeting. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, and I'll be your planning section chief as we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. Today, for episode 30, we'll be talking about volunteers, and I have a special guest from the Washington State Department of Ecology to help take us through that complicated subject. I'm really excited to unpack all of this information, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm here with Nhi Irwin, the Statewide Resource Section Manager with the Washington State Department of Ecology. We're going to be talking about Washington State's policy for the use of volunteers. Nhi, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've been talking about doing this particular episode for a while, and we've been focusing lately on doing additional work in drills exercising volunteers. So I think this is timely. But before we get started on that, can you tell me, what is the Statewide Resource Section Manager? What do you do?
A little bit of everything. So the statewide, so there's 4 sections within the Department of Ecology's program. So the Spills Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Program is one of 10 environmental programs under Ecology. So my section really is the section that supports. We have all the support function. So all of the research and analysis, IT management of our data systems, all of the sort of cross-programmatic planning that occurs for the program is done under my section. That's like our program planning, our strategic planning, performance metrics, training, and investigations and enforcement activities are under my section. So really, we are the section of individual subject matter experts that really are supporting the other program areas of prevention, preparedness, and response. So we sort of keep the section going with our support of their activities.
Okay, great. Well, today we're going to talk about volunteers, as I said, and, volunteers have been a part of oil spill response for a long, long time. We kind of talk about it like it's new, but volunteers have been used to support wildlife capture, rehabilitation, and release for, 50 years. And so that's not new, but Washington State has policies that are relatively new surrounding the use of volunteers. So what does Washington consider a volunteer to be?
Yeah, so you're right. The use of volunteers, or the question around the use of volunteers around oil spill, has been around for a really long time. But I think it really came to be a focus in Washington after the lessons learned from the Cosby-Busan incident in California. So there was a incident-specific report that came out, and it highlighted a bunch of lessons learned, and volunteers and volunteer opportunities was one of those things that the state legislatures really wanted Washington to be able to provide. And so one of those things was putting together a system in place for how to manage volunteers. We didn't get any resources to do it, but were given the mandate to do it. And so what we came up with is a registration site. It's a portal, and it's the Oil Spills 101 site. And that's where we ask volunteers to go and pre-register to be a volunteer. And it's also a part of the Northwest Area Contingency Plan policy for the use of volunteers, is that we want to first, there's a priority for pre-registered and pre-trained volunteers to be used in an event of an incident. The Oil Spills 101 site is also a communication portal for us. And so when an incident happens, we go to that portal, and we can survey the list of volunteers that are registered with us if there is an ask for a very particular skill set, and we can, survey that. We usually send out a survey during a drill, actually, to the system just to test it, to test whether or not the system is working as a communication tool. And we'll ask people, if an incident were to occur today, when are you available? How long are you available for? We ask if there are specific skill sets that are needed. Do you have any specialized training? Do you have any specialized certification? And we collect that information, and we're able to really inform unified command of the possibility of the type of volunteer we may have and how many people we could get to come to an incident if they were to use volunteers. So that's the sort of structure that we have in place in Washington now.
So does every volunteer that wants to be involved in Washington need to go and register at the portal? What if you're already part of an organization? I'm thinking of Island Oil Spill Association, IOSA, who's been providing wildlife rehabilitation volunteers for quite a while. If I'm part of that group, do I need to go to the portal?
You don't have to. You can register as an individual, but the portal also allows organizations to register as a volunteer organization, and we actually really encourage them to do that. And we have a handful. We've got the Audubon Society is registered with us. The Red Cross is with us as well, and so they have registered as an organization. And we really want to leverage organizations, volunteer organizations that can really help us with volunteers. If you're a registered organization, we have one number to call, and we're able to leverage all of your volunteers who might be interested. We may use you and your staff, in helping us, for example, intake volunteers. Set up training sites, or to help us manage and supervise volunteers. So if you're an organization out there that have a group of people who might be interested in oil spills, we certainly have done workshops with your organization to kind of tell you what we do and what we're looking for. And we talk about what during an incident, how you're possibly called out or how you may be contacted. And so, yes, as an organization, we hope that you'll come in and register with us.
So is it easier for me as an individual to volunteer by being associated with an existing organization than to volunteer as an individual from the website, or does it not matter?
It doesn't really matter. I think it depends on the level of involvement that you want to have interacting on oil spill issues. So we use the portal. We use the Oil Spills 101 portal to communicate to all of our registered individuals to talk about training opportunities that come up, and so, or the latest information on some particular topic around oil spills. So we use that. So if you're a part of, say, an affiliated one, the email goes to the affiliated email, and that person, of course, that organization would then, spread the word, or, that, but you would get it directly if you were there as an individual. It just gives you a little bit more information if that's what you want. But if you're just kind of registered and you'll get called when your organization gets called, that's okay too.
We've all seen the images, or at least most of us, I think, have, of people in their flip-flops scooping oil into Home Depot buckets down on the California beaches during the Refugia oil spill. Hey, people want to clean up oil. Can we let them do that in Washington? What are volunteers allowed to do under the Northwest Area Contingency Plan?
Yeah, so currently in the area plan, there is policies and guidance that is where volunteers will not have direct contact with oil. Volunteers are always supplementing professional resources. And there's just a lot of liability issues around that. And of course, health and training. The professionals train up to handle oil. And there isn't any in-time training that will help you with that. So so the policy is very clear about non-contact, no contact with oil for our volunteers. There's a number of activities as a volunteer you could possibly be used for. The more specialized ones will likely require you to have special training, maybe even specialized licenses. And if that's the case, you may end up being hired by, for example, if it was a wildlife provider. Once you're hired as an employee and you get trained or whatever else you're going to do with that organization, you no longer are a volunteer. So that oversight is now with the company that you're contracted with. But if you're not contracted, other activities, they're not glamorous. And it's hard because oil spill work is hard. You may be asked to be a part of a call center. During an oil spill, there's going to be a lot of questions from the public, the media, and everybody else. We may set up something called a joint information center, and we may need people to, be there to handle those calls. The Wildlife Center may even have a need for volunteers to help answer phone calls of reported oil spill, oiled wildlife. And so that's a possibility as well. So those kinds of activities are the ones that are just really keeping volunteers away from contact with oil. So those are some activities, that I can speak to today.
Well, the area plan lists a few. It talks about pre-cleaning beaches. What does that mean? When I ask somebody to pre-clean a beach, it's not even dirty yet, Nhi.
Well, we don't, there's pre-cleaning, are we putting up, is it maybe walking the beach and identifying, oiled areas and things like that? I don't know that we are clear necessarily about what pre-cleaning a beach looks like. It's probably dependent. I don't think that we would have volunteers out there with scrubbers or hoses or anything like that. But we definitely have some existing organizations that are out there. Our beach watchers, they're out there spotting for oil. They spot other things as well. And so those kinds of activities happen even before an oil spill too. So those are the kinds of activities, if people have an interest in actually looking for oil to help us spot them. There's certainly organizations like Beach Watchers or even the Audubon Society that have training specifically for the type of data, collecting some data, environmental data or species and data that can be helpful in an oil spill too. So a lot of different kinds of activities can happen to try and not have volunteers touch oil, though. That's pretty clear.
But what kind of training does the state provide, if any, for people who want to become part of the volunteer corps?
So we have and have been conducting a HAZWOPER refresher course. And in the past, we used to do it in person twice a year. It's been in collaboration with the Coast Guard, Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as Focus Wildlife. And so we've put on this training to kind of give people that certification. And it's very specific to oil wildlife volunteers. And so the examples and the things that we talk about, the hazards and all of that, is focused on what you would potentially encounter if you were a volunteer dealing with oil wildlife. So we provide that, and certainly we've collaborated with other groups to put on volunteer information and training, for example, local officials what can they expect to understand when an oil spill happens in their community? What's their role? What can they ask for? What can they do? And so that's been kind of the extent of our resources at this point to put on those trainings. We have been asked to come and present as subject matter experts with organizations, volunteer organizations that put on training for their own volunteers. So we've participated in that a number of times, but we didn't get to do that last year, of course. But we're offering the HASWAPR training for our volunteers this year, coming up in December. It'll be a virtual one. There'll be kind of a hybrid of some learning via videos and then a live webinar on one day. So more information to come on that.
You have a date for that setup?
We do. So it'll be December 11th. I think that's a Saturday. Is the live portion of it. And then there are 2 weeks prior, we'll be sending out an email to all of our registered volunteers to give them a link to all of the videos and the learning that they'll have to do prior to that date.
So if I'm a plan holder and I have an oil spill event, what should I, as the incident commander, be thinking about with volunteers? Am I going to turn this whole issue over to the state of Washington and you're going to manage it for me, and all I need to do is provide some tasking, or do I need to provide a volunteer coordinator? What do I, as a plan holder, need to do?
So as a plan holder, you are required to have in place a process for that. And so how we're playing it now in drills, I think that's kind of the best way to describe it, is as an incident commander, you should be thinking proactively. You may not need any volunteers in the early hours, but you need to be thinking about 3-5 days from now. A big enough incident, we're going to be at it for a little while. And so you should be tasking the liaison unit to be assessing the need for volunteers. And there is a sort of a task for them. And so they know that they are going to first and foremost communicate about volunteers. So we're instantly going to put out that message. That's what you can expect, that we're going to put out a message in the first press release or any sort of social media postings that we do about the incident. Volunteers are not needed at this time, but please go and register at the Oil Spills 101 site, and you'll get more information about that if there is a need for volunteers. So we immediately put that out there so that people know where to go if they have an interest to volunteer. And then liaison will go around and ask all of the sections to be thinking about where they may need volunteers and get kind of that assessment. And then they make a recommendation to Unified Command for the use of volunteers. So for example, they may talk to the JIC, and the JIC is asking to set up a call center and they'll need volunteers. The wildlife branch may have a need for some very specialized skilled volunteers in those early hours to help them manage the rehab centers. So they may have a request there. Long term, they may need people to man the call center for oil wildlife spotting or observations. So there's some opportunities there. Liaison themselves may want to have storefronts in communities and open houses and things like that. There could be volunteers that could help us with that. So the liaison unit would make the recommendation to Unified Command. And if Unified Command feels like it is a priority, then they actually would task the planning unit to stand up a volunteer coordination unit. And then all of the sort of planning and intaking and the logistics around that would happen within this volunteer unit.
So basically, little human resources department within the planning section,
Yes.
right?
We
Hiring, vetting. I'm not sure I want volunteers answering a call center line. I'm not, I'm not sure they're going to give out my message.
Well, I mean, you have to have training for them to do that. You have to have talking points for them, and it's, I mean, that's a part of this information. And maybe the only thing they do is take down the name and phone number and get back to people with information. But it can, I mean, as a lot of people are going to be calling, asking for a lot of questions, and I think we are not resourced in that way right now in the state, or even I think even with the plan holders, we couldn't. I just don't think that a big enough incident we could do without volunteers in some way.
So you often play the role in drills of the liaison officer and work closely with the public information officer and the joint information center. Do you see uh, liaison as using volunteers, and have you developed even a cursory plan for that yourself?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've put together plans for how we think we might use volunteers, and I think in a very real incident in Mosier, Oregon, the derailment there. One of the ways that liaison used volunteers was to communicate to the community there about their use of water, because the incident took out their waste management system for several days. And in that community, I mean, speaking a little bit here about knowing your audience and how you communicate with them, the community of Mosier wasn't on Twitter, they weren't on social media. How they got their information was through their senior citizen center. And so the city planner happened to be part of liaison, which is a great resource, a plug for always getting the local person involved. She was able to say, you know what, why don't we gather people in the community that will volunteer to go door to door? And that's what they did. They got a group of people that showed up at the command post. We gave them some information, some flyers, and they went door to door to their neighbors and let them know not to use their water for flushing and where to go to get drinking water and all of that. So that was a real life example of how we were able to use volunteers to do that work to help us communicate to the community that was impacted. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a part of the liaison plan is to figure out how to get into the communities. And we know that there's benefit to an individual seeing someone that they trust within their community, especially community leaders, and having them be kind of our ambassador to the response.
Oh, great use of volunteers. Yeah, we saw during this vaccination drive for the pandemic, huge numbers of volunteers being used. Good friend of mine volunteered at one of the vaccination centers, and it was a drive up center, and he was the greeter. He was the first person that someone driving up saw, and kind of answered all of their initial questions and set the tone for the rest of their little journey through the circuit. And it makes such a huge difference. And you mentioned having like liaison storefronts, and I kind of see the same kind of thing. The people who greet those who are showing up for a public meeting and handing out whatever flyers or materials have been prepared for them, and ushering them to a seat like they've shown up to a wedding or something. So great use for volunteers for something like that. I think we forget, and I do myself as an incident commander, that there's so many other things going on that don't actually put your hands on the oil, right? And there's
Yeah.
a lot of opportunity for that. And I think we have to just tell the story that these are really important jobs. Yes, I know you want to come and clean up the oil, but this needs to be done too, right? for every for every soldier that's out on the front line in World War II who actually shoots a bullet, there's like 1,000 people forming the logistics support chain behind them to allow that to happen. And oil spill response is the same way. For everyone who's at the tip of the spear with their hands in the oil, there's a logistics support chain behind them that makes that work.
Yeah, and I think also too, as a plan holder, company, the government, we can't avoid volunteers. When people see their communities, their beaches, their favorite park, anything that is an impact to them, they are called to action. And without pre-planning, guidance, acknowledgement, that something is happening, and that we want you to get the right information. We want to put and steer your energy for action to a positive place. We have to do that. We are going to always lose in the public arena of public perception and opinion if we don't address it. And of course, it's easier to just not deal with it. And it's hard. It's a lot of untrained people, a lot of people who have expectations that you can't meet, liability issues, all of those things. But we cannot avoid it. And it is just something that needs to be at the forefront of you in an incident commander, your priority about messaging. Those early hours of messaging is so critical. We hear you, we know something has happened, we're on it, and we know that you have these concerns. And one of these things might be if there's an opportunity for you to help out. And I think that adds a great deal of public trust. And we're always looking to build that in a disaster, moment. And so I think it is scary, and we have a lot of work to do, though. I think we need to play it more robustly in drills and play it to this sort of place of now standing up a unit. What does the logistics look like? And so there's been some chatter about maybe putting on a workshop for how to play those things a little bit more outside of the time constraint of a one-day drill. And so that's definitely on a wish list of ours too. So if there's a plan holder out there that's listening to this podcast that wants to help sponsor this, we welcome it. So I think we just have to do it as a community. We're all here. So.
Well, I'm in year 3 next year, and I only have two items on the checklist to knock off, which are really low-hanging fruit. Maybe we'll do it. We being Wismic, maybe we'll do it. I was thinking of doing radio comms too, which are volunteers, right? I've been digging through the Section 9501 communications manual, and I'm thinking about how we might employ the amateur radio emergency services folks. So we do kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
There you go.
So what do you consider to be some of the things that we still need to look at for volunteers? What's out there that has yet to really be addressed?
I think for us, it's really about closing the gap, or at least understanding more about the issue of liability. Again, if a volunteer comes in as a volunteer and they become hired by the company or contractor or whatever else, they are covered under that provision of work, right? But it's the liability around what to do for volunteers that say work in a command post. Who are they working for? I think there's not a clear understanding of that. There are a lot of gray areas, a lot of technicalities around that we really need to get to. And I think we haven't been able to really delve into that because of the complexity of liability. And it's different in every county that we encounter. Some counties are very robust in their volunteer planning and have actual volunteer coordinators. Other counties don't. And so, who really has the liability is on the take for the liability of a volunteer, a true volunteer that isn't a hired employee. What happens if they slip or trip or get injured while they're volunteering? So I feel like that is a area that we need more clarity about. And I think once we get that clarity, we may be able to understand and provide for more opportunities for volunteers. Maybe the expanding of the list of activities that they can do will be more defined. Right now, I think we have been very safe about that because of not understanding fully the liability issue. But I just think that that's an area that we just haven't really worked. And so I think if there was something more to do in that area, it would be to really get some clarity around liability around oil spill volunteers.
We might think about doing some specific task training, like the call center you're talking about. Maybe we take volunteers who are interested in that work and start to provide some training so they're ready for that kind of activity. Look at how we might roll these amateur radio folks into the communications unit. It's called out in the area plan. I don't recall ever exercising it in 20 years.
Yeah. I think another great one is to continue. We did this years ago, and I think we need to do it again, which I think the training for local officials was really valuable. And we went around to I think we're only the project that we did was really North Puget Sound area. But we should do that statewide and really help local officials understand their role in oil spills, how they get information, how they get involved, what is even the jurisdictions that they have as well. And so that that would be a great next step too that we could do is to provide for that, to get some funding to do that training for local officials. It went very well. People really appreciated that, and it was eye-opening for them, and it helped them understand when it impacts their community what they can do and what is also done. So that's sort of the first obstacle that we have to get past is this idea of there's nothing being done, right? It's an outrage and that stuff. So if we have those people who have constituents that they communicate with, if they're able to understand that there is at least a framework around how oil spills are managed, that's a huge value add to our ability to communicate to communities during an incident.
Well, you'd have to be ongoing, right? Because there's such a turnover in local officials, especially elected officials. You virtually have to run the program annually or at least every other year to kind of keep it fresh.
Or even to be able to do pre-recorded. I mean, I think PHMSA put on, they have a great set of training videos that they, that was the premise of them doing that video. So I want to put a plug in for that. We have it linked at the Oil Spills 101 site. They did 2 videos, one for tribes and one for elected officials to give them an overview of what oil spill response is like. But I think we could duplicate that on a local level too. So that's an opportunity there too.
That sounds great. Well, as we close out, is there any last comments you want to make to plan holders or would-be volunteers, and maybe a final plug for what is going on at Ecology?
Yeah, I mean, for plan holders, I hope that you're more open to when those drill designers come and talk to you about how to plan a drill, is that you might want to consider playing volunteers. We, of course, it's a priority for Ecology. We feel very strongly about about ensuring that gets played, and part of the liaison sort of work activities is to work on volunteers. And so, an openness to that, sort of a willingness to try it would be great. And for those who are listening who want to volunteer, it's hard because we hope it never happens. And your interests of like spending a Saturday in a classroom to learn about HAZWOPER is greatly appreciated. And just keep at it, and please sign up at the Oil Spills 101 site. You'll get a lot of great information about what's happening around oil spill issues in Washington State, and then training opportunities, whether with us or with other organizations, are also listed there. So it's a really great place to just really understand what's happening in Washington State around oil movement, and around how you can help out in your community if it ever happens.
Awesome. Well, Nhi Irwin, Statewide Resource Section Manager for the Washington State Department of Ecology. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to have been here.
Well, a big thank you to the Washington State Department of Ecology for continuing to support the Tactics Meeting podcast and come on the show with such good information. Volunteers is a large, fairly complicated topic, and we could have workshops and go on and on, but I think what we did today was really helpful. If you like the show and you'd like to be a guest or have some topics that you think that we should cover, you can email me. The address is podcast@thetacticsmeeting.online. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.